For tonight's AI for Beginners workshop, we are welcoming Sebastian Schaal from Luminovo. Sebastian graduated top of his class from the Technical University of Munich and the Center for Digital Technology and Management, also here in Munich. And during his master's at the Stanford University, he focused on management science and machine learning. He worked as a consultant at McKinsey before returning to engineering at the Intel Corporation and deep tech startups like Navis and Magazino, where he developed intelligent image processing algorithms. Together with Timon Ruban, he then founded Luminovo in 2017. And Luminovo is the fastest growing software provider for the electronics industry. Their software suite prevents billion-dollar and time-consuming mistakes in product design and accelerates the time to market of electronic products. Luminovo's solutions shape value chain processes in a data-driven, intelligent, and collaborative way. And through digitization and automation, they enable faster and more competitive quoting for the electronics manufacturers and PCB suppliers, and fewer iterations for the electronic designers. And now, today, we have the fantastic chance to dive deeper into the world of AI and see how easy it can be to get started programming here. If you're from a UX background or a business background, Sebastian will show you today how to get started. Good evening, Sebastian.
Good evening. I hope you can all hear me okay. Very excited to be here. Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. I think when just reading through it, it feels like a mouthful, but I hope we can get into that very soon. And yeah, introduction to AI today. I'm super excited to be part of the Makeathon. And I think some stuff is already given away. I think my background, as already said, born and raised in Munich, started my academic career in Munich, worked a little bit in corporate and then in startup before founding Luminovo. Maybe while you're asking today, as already mentioned, we're building software for the electronics industry, but we acted for 2.5 years as an AI solutions provider. So we did a lot of different projects with different clients. And that is also where we started doing these AI workshops, from introduction workshops to more advanced workshops. And that's basically what I'm building upon today. So about us as a company, as said, founded in 2017. Currently, generally our core purpose has always been to accelerate technological progress, because we are big believers that technology is the best tool that we have developed as humankind to solve some of the biggest challenges we're facing today. And how we are doing this today at Luminovo is by focusing on the electronics industry, as already been stated, because it's shaping our physical world all around us. And yeah, our journey was already mentioned. We started doing AI solutions, then switched to being a product company that's VC funded, and today we're building software as a service products for the electronics industry. So much about Luminovo. So currently we're a team of diverse team, hiring remotely, hiring in Munich. Product and engineering is one part of the puzzle, and the rest is the people, finance, and revenue organization, which is under my umbrella. But enough about that. Let's dive into the agenda. So I'm first going to give you a little bit of an overview of artificial intelligence and debunk the word a little bit. Then we're going to dive deeper into the machine learning and deep learning and this differentiations. Talk a little bit more about in machine learning, what are different styles, how you can approach a problem, add some additional concepts, and then kind of close with recent advances in AI that kind of give you a feeling what the cutting edge today is, and some of the stuff you probably already heard in some of the other workshops, because OpenAI, so much I can already give away, is one of the folks who are pushing the status quo. Let's go into it. If you Google AI today, this is what you find. So it's mostly this notion of a humanoid robot that is somehow probably going to take over the world. So it's still today very much influenced by this kind of Terminator vision of AI that is still deep in our heads. But if you dive a little bit deeper, what AI as a concept really means, it's from the book definition, the theory and development of computer systems that are able to perform tasks that are normally requiring human intelligence. So it's really about a system that's solving problems that normally only potentially humans could do. What my main takeaway from this is, it's definitely not magic, but it's a lot of applied math that you have to connect together nicely to really solve these big problems. And different forms and colors of AI systems. And this is also something that we're going to dive into today. So to get a little bit of an idea of these different concepts of AI that are floating around, I like to give you a little bit of a feasibility study. So in a sense, this is in a sense my the line from something, a task that is very simple in theory, as assembling IKEA furniture, to something that feels very far away, and that's like colonizing Mars, and something that we consider physically impossible, that's teleporting. And when we talk about AI today, we're mostly talking about artificial narrow intelligence. That is basically AI systems that are capable to solving a very specific narrow tasks. So the systems today that are used to understand your images, for example, identify you in some pictures on your iPhone, are not the same that are helping you write more effective text messages. So different domains currently still require very different AI systems. And they are kind of between something as plug and play in theory, as simple as an IKEA furniture assembly, where there is a concrete action plan. There are documentations out there tell you how to use these systems. But some of them are also like on the research front, where we know which additional steps we have to take to advance the research. And that's why I take the idea of colonizing Mars here, because we kind of know the physical challenges that we have to overcome and the directions we have to evolve into, but we're just not there yet. And this concept, what most people, if you also think it back to this humanoid robot, connect to AI, is this idea of artificial general intelligence. So a system that is human-like, can solve a lot of different problems by just using one system for all those tasks. And I always like to put this concept of AGI somewhere between colonizing Mars and teleporting, where we know this is something that's not physically impossible, but there is also currently no 10-step action plan how to get there. We don't know exactly if the research we're doing today by OpenAI, by DeepMind, by Google and others will really ultimately lead us to that goal of AGI, but we also know that it's not physically impossible. And if we think about general intelligence, we have to also face the fact that there could be something like super intelligence. And that's exactly the thing that most people are afraid of when they're panicking about AI. To give a little bit like a easy visualization to this, I have put up a graph of an intellect graph where we see how different species on our planet today could be positioned, right? We as humans tend to think that there's something as stupid as an ant, then there's birds, there's chimps, then there's us, and there's someone super intelligent like Einstein, and then there's something we don't know. That's probably how we humans would draw and categorize that graph. But the reality looks like a little bit different, right? Because us and Einstein are at least still using the same hardware. We're all humans biologically. And the steps that are needed from us to Einstein are actually a lot smaller than you would need to go from like a bird to a chimp level of processing capabilities. And if we're now mapping those concepts to these levels, we have to face the fact that we as humans could probably look down on these systems a long time and consider them narrow because they're just not at the level of our intellect just yet. But if we can build systems that can jump from bird to chimp level easily, and that can do that kind of autonomously without us helping us needing to guide them a lot, we could also face the fact that at some point we could wake up and they have jumped over about our capabilities of doing. And the thing is, if we ask a chimp what we are doing today, why every one of us is staring at a computer, they might not even understand what we're actually doing because it's not capable of grasping these concepts. So there might be at some point super intelligent systems that are doing things that are beyond our imagination. And that's like this kind of wait but why drawing, where we might be standing at this human level intelligence station, playing with our smartphones, seeing that AI is arriving and it's coming ever faster and it's gone. That's of course now very dystopian in a sense of scary, but that just gives you an idea of why people do worry about this kind of concept. Another thing to maybe also have in mind, what is human intelligence anyway, right? It's in a sense probably us using our sensors and connecting them in a sensible way. What do we see? What do we hear? What we feel? What we actually do and what we say? And all of those things you can probably map to domains where AI currently is doing a lot of research in, and AI is doing advances. Computer vision is how machines see the world. How machines hear the world today is often still done via translating speech to text form and then using natural language processing. Feeling is mostly the sensor input that is then processed by something like robotics, is our way of interacting with the physical world. And then how machines currently speak is very often still using a natural language understanding or processing pipeline and then translating it to speech. So there you see also already the connect that NLP is somehow from hearing to saying like a very interesting input-output domain where a lot of research has happened, and that can help us kind of understand how machines can more and more become more and more intelligent. And I think that's also something that OpenAI has done a lot of work in. Because as you know, there's like recent advanced GPT-3 that has been part of the hackathon, the last TUM.ai Makeathon, is apparently the only system that has solved the Turing test. Now, those of you who have not know what a Turing test is, that was like a concept that Turing pioneered decades ago, where he said, if I, as a human questioner in the middle, if I'm basically chatting with a system, and I'm trying to ask the system questions and the system is responding me, and I as a human start to lose track of if I'm actually talking to another human or if I'm talking to a machine. And if a machine is capable of kind of fooling a human and thinking that this chat motion is actually done with a human instead of a machine, then this machine is apparently solving the Turing test. So basically a level of intelligence. And GPT-3 is, as said, one of the systems that is declared as having the first one to having solved this test, which is why it was a big deal and why people are a lot excited about it. So much on the concept of AI. So the first takeaway for you, first block is narrow intelligence, general intelligence, super intelligence are three different pieces of the puzzle that you have to distinguish. And for the rest of the conversation, we are diving into this idea of narrow intelligence because there are another threefold distinction that we want to dive a little bit deeper into. And that is already a given array. That's the concept of machine learning and deep learning. Because as we already defined, AI is only answering the question, what kind of problem we are actually solving, right? That is the answer that AI gives us. If I basically throw a task at a machine and the machine in its box, the AI box can deliver the answer to me, and I feel that this task that I'm throwing at a machine is something where I as a human don't have a natural understanding of how it came from A to B, there's some form of intelligent processing involved, then you could already consider this AI box an AI system. So in theory, if there's a system where you throw in your current blood samples and a diagnosis is given away, then and you as a human don't think this is a trivial mapping because there's some potentially medical knowledge involved to do this mapping, then you could already consider this an AI system. But the question of how you solve it is something else. So first, we have to understand this big bubble of AI is all the tasks that normally require human intelligence can be considered AI tasks, and systems that solve it can be considered AI systems. Machine learning now is a clear subset of AI because of answering the question of how we are solving this problem. So machine learning is really where the learning comes into play. So the definition is really a system that can have the ability to learn from data without being explicitly programmed. So it means there's no human that gives explicit answers to all the different questions, but is somehow assembling knowledge from data that you feed it. And there's like for you, we do it in a silent motion, but a little quiz for you from what I just already gave away what machine learning is to give you an idea. You can do it for yourself. Is actually machine learning required for this task or not? So first one is finding all tweets that mention Donald Trump by name. Are we needing machine learning for this? Pick your answer. Finding all pictures that show Instagram puppies. Are we needing machine learning for this or not? Or can we solve it with rules? Your Spotify weekly playlist, can that be done without machine learning, or do we need machine learning for this? Playing Connect 4 very well. How does it look there? And then lastly, playing Go very well. What do we need? Do we need machine learning for this? So I hope you gave it a little bit of a thought. Giving it away. So for finding all tweets that mention Donald Trump by name, we don't need machine learning. It's just a Control F on your keyboard. That's something you can hard code to a machine. No kind of ML is needed. For the Instagram puppies, it's a little bit different, right? Because what is the alternative of using kind of a self-learning system for this is that you would have to hard code rules into the system that can, with high confidence, distinguish what is the raisin of a muffin and what's the eye of a chihuahua by just having access to the pixel values. And that's an incredibly hard rule that you would have to craft or set of rules. So here, self-learning systems that can kind of self-optimize and find the common denominators or common patterns between eyes and raisins can really are necessary here to do this trick. For your Discover Weekly playlist on Spotify, it's a so-and-so because there is like a mathematically defined way how to solve this problem. It's for the tech nerds called matrix completion problem. Think about the Netflix concept as well. You have a lot of movies here, a lot of people who have viewed movies, and some people have given a 4 to 5 star rating. What you actually want to do is complete that table so you know who else would give a similar rating to a similar movie. And that's something you can just hardcore optimize. But Spotify does a lot more. They are analyzing the raw audio data of the music files, creating micro genres automatically that they match to you. So they're actually using machine learning for this. But the concept problem of a recommender system could also be solved without machine learning. For Playing Connect 4, you don't need machine learning just yet. Why? Because the realm of possibilities that this game could take is still something that you could map out completely. Every possibility, have a big tree from all the possibilities, how they can like come from another and one to each other, and then always derive a perfect strategy. So you could always win play a perfect game in Connect 4. You need a supercomputer for this, but it's still doable. That's not the case anymore with Go. Because Go, if you think about the possibilities we have here, that's an 18 by 18 or 19 by 19 grid with that's 381 different positions on the board. And as you can see here, a position on the board can either be empty, black, or white. So that makes 3 to the power of 381 states. That's like more atoms than we have in the universe. So just the amount of possibilities in this game is just unbelievably large and larger than any computer could ever cope with. So to understand this game and master this game, and as you probably know from the news, AI has solved this problem. You need something more involved, like a system like humans that looks at this, reasons from it, understands patterns, and considers the next best move. So one simple form of machine learning, just to give you already a primer, is an input-output problem. So you have data that you put in and you want to predict an output. So just, I guess we're in Munich, everyone is always on an apartment hunt. So a very simple example that you could do is predict if this is a fair price to rent an apartment. And yeah, it's some people are maybe shaking their heads because it's too cheap. But so just like this idea of I collect a lot of data from ImmoScout or ImmoScout here for something to rent, where I have a lot of attributes what classify an apartment I can either buy or rent, and I have some real world numbers of for how much this was rented out, and maybe even some market indicators. And I could use this data to kind of build a model that gives me for a new input gives me a new output. And that's a fairly simple problem you've maybe already solved in your stats class. We're going to talk about what this actually is underneath the hood in a second, but that is already something that you can consider machine learning. If you have a system that you can train by feeding it this kind of ImmoScout data to come up with new answers. So what we take away, they're kind of in this AI system bubble, there's two distinctions. If we have a machine learning system, then this is an AI system that learns from data or experience. And if we have an AI system that has a bunch of hard-coded expert rules, so a rule-based system, then we talk about like a classic AI system or expert system. And that's also the distinction that we have in our AI box here. And it's like a little bit like Schrödinger's cat, right? If you don't know what's in the box, you just don't know yet if that's a rule-based system or a machine learning system. For example, again, taking the blood results you have, coming up with a diagnosis. And only if you open the box, then you know if there were a bunch of medical experts that have tried to codify their knowledge in a bunch of sophisticated rules, and they are giving you a very good answer, or if this is actually a system that was fed a lot of data that had already blood results and diagnoses, and we're trying to find a mapping, similarly how we did it with the ImmoScout example. So that's in a sense this paradigm that machine learning has brought into the programming world, which I just want to give away here in a second. So how humans are kind of learning, or at least our understanding of human learning, is we observe something in the real world, we're kind of internalizing our rules in our neurons, and then we behave. And machine programming so far has always been that there's data or we observe that we've collected about the world, then we write programs based on rules, and then they deliver a result. And that is like machine programming in a sophisticated way. That's like these rule-based AI systems. And the machine learning concept now is different, that there's data, but we humans, we are writing a program that is orchestrating the learning aspect, that kind of uses the data to then create the actual program or the model, which is often called, that is then executed in the real world. So the code we are writing as humans is not the one that is then used for an inference, so finding something new. That is then what the difference between the learning part and the inference part of machine learning is all about. Okay, I think you already anticipated what's coming with this circle diagram. So deep learning, as like a very well-known buzzword as well, is now just another subset of machine learning. Because the simple answer is deep learning is machine learning with deep neural networks. So if we have the same problem as before, this input-output problem of ImmoScout, and the box we had before, just as we have here as this blue placeholder, if we are filling this placeholder now with a deep neural network, then we have deep learning. So it's in a sense, it's a machine learning system where we're restricting the family of algorithms that you can use. So if you're using exclusively or like partially deep neural networks, then you have a deep learning system. Where do we now need deep learning, and where can we go with traditional machine learning? And the rule of thumb is that for unstructured data, so all the data that you cannot put meaningfully in an Excel sheet or an SQL database, that is normally where you would need deep learning. Images, audio, signals, text. This is something that's in a sense unstructured in a database table domain. And there we have seen tremendous successes with working with neural networks. If you're working on the next prediction problem from like a structured data set, you're often well advised to work with traditional machine learning methods, because they often sometimes even still outperform deep networks, are easier to maintain, quicker to train. So it's like there's no need to go into the deep learning devism. It's the most used algorithm today probably is still like a standard supervised learning algorithm. What that is, we talk about in a second. So what's now important with these neural networks? Why are they so great and powerful? Because you can think about them being more flexible. Classic machine learning algorithms, right? We said table format is something they like the most. So you have like a Excel sheet with clear column headers. This is a name. This is like the zip code. This is the street. So this is something that these systems can work very well with. But what if your input space is now very different? An image, in a sense, if you can think about it, is like has an X direction and a Y direction, and has different pixel values. So it's like a three-dimensional cube, and if you want like that. RGB, red, green, blue are the values per pixel, and you have two-dimensional pixels. And you can now like design these neural networks that they kind of adapt to the shape of the input. So like a neural network these days that is processing images is still structured a little bit different because it kind of scans through an image in an XY direction versus a system that processes text. Because text, at least we know in our human understanding, has an order. You read a sentence from A to B. It's basically like a signal that you process. And these systems are then looking again a little bit differently. Another different structure is graphs, right? We had seen a lot of breakthrough research in the biotech sphere where people are working on molecules, and like a molecule as a biological concept or like a structural shape is a graph. A social network is a graph. And so we can also use models that are coping with this special structure to make better use of it. So that's like the second big differentiation I want you to take away, that in this machine learning realm, we have the distinction between traditional machine learning, statistical methods like a linear regression you might have used in your stats class, and deep neural networks. So again, what has changed now on this realm is this standard programming again. We have data, we have some human assumptions, and we try to write a program like that. Now, the traditional machine learning space was often still that there was data and we had a little bit less assumptions, but we were thinking about features, right? Features is, for example, as I said, the zip code or the name, the street you're living in. People were still crafting some kind of features where they felt, hey, they have a very good relation to the output. For example, if I only know the square, if I know just the length and the width of an apartment, these might be interesting indicators. But then I know, hey, square meters, that's actually a metric I want to use. So it's better to first multiply the length and the width of an apartment to have the square meters as like a metric that I can then feed to an algorithm. What deep learning has changed here now is that we have decreased our assumptions and we have been able to directly learn even from unstructured data. So this idea of designing meaningful features is something that we now are giving to the machines. And that, of course, gives the machines more flexibility, also comes with higher costs in compute. But this compute cost is then often given away, but a lot better performance. And taking this one step further is like, how has this like deep learning revolution, like deep learning is one form of representation learning because it learns the representation directly from the data, changed over time, is that we've started to not just work with lots of data to begin with, but to also start to transfer knowledge. So kind of work with a model that we have used on a different task, which we're going to talk about later on, and that I can already transfer and give us another input as a kickstart for our efforts. And another concept I'm throwing in here now, like this, what self-supervised learning is and reinforcement learning is something we cover next. But this is just another concept where we have changed. We've now added again a few human assumptions where we're giving the machine a goal, like a reward of what it should be achieving, and to again solve different kinds of problems. So that closes basically this second distinction of what difference between AI, machine learning, and deep learning is. Which brings us to this last bucket of now zooming into machine learning, and by that automatically also deep learning. We're looking at the different learning styles, how we can actually teach the machine something by data. So I'm going to map out 4 different components here, spanning the machine learning universe, giving you a few examples of how they are actually working. So the still most commonly used machine learning algorithm family is supervised learning. So supervised learning is exactly what we have already shown you before with this input-output example of the ImmoScout issue. Here we have like another even simpler version, right? If we again looking at house prices, and we have on one axis, we have just the square meters, and on the other axis, I have as a data point, I have the actual sales price of the house. That's just if I want to fit a function that approximates, given the square meters, the sales price, this is in a sense already a machine learning problem, where I have an input, I have an output, and I want to find the best model that is not basically learning these sales prices by heart, but is finding like a pattern. And here, the simplest pattern we could find in something like that is a straight line. So you all know this from school, y equals m times x plus t. That's like the function of a line. So we have, in a sense, two parameters here. We have like the line, in a sense, with its, sorry, I have to kind of play around with my earpods now. Hope this still works. And basically, so the axis that you have, like the x dimension, the y dimension you're putting above, and then kind of the slope you have on this graph. And of course, if you can make it a lot more complex, right? You can add more features to this. Features is now just an input that you give in a structured form. As I already said, this can be the postcode, the number of rooms, the number of windows, whatever you want. And that, in a sense, is like a supervised learning algorithm. This was regression. So regression is one form that predicts a numerical output, but you can also do classification. So you're predicting a class. Here just we have like a few examples of the machine just doesn't know what this is yet. And then you just give labels to these things. You can now consider them woofs and huis. And then the machine will look at different images and classify them in woofs and huis. What you have to understand is that the machine doesn't necessarily understand that a woof is a dog or a hui is a spinning wheel or a child's toy, because it can only learn from the associations you give to it. For example, here we would have no idea what the machine would do if I have a dog that is wearing like a rainbow-shaped collar. Could be that the machine has no idea what actually is on that image because it's never seen an instance like that. And this is, in a sense, the important task that you in machine learning always want to do. You want to find a model that generalizes, that is not memorizing some images by heart, in that case images, but that generalizes and understands the concepts of a dog. One of the issues is it's very hard for us to test if the machine has actually understood it, or if it has just found that all dogs have brown fur. Okay, so that's supervised learning, always connects an input to an output, being it like house features to prices or pictures to classification label. That's supervised learning. Unsupervised learning, as you can imagine from the name, get rid of the labels. So if you only have input data without clear labels, neither numerical nor class labels, then we are talking about unsupervised learning. So what the main task of unsupervised learning then is in this regard is to uncover structure. Classic could be like user behavior on a website, where you try to find clusters that help you to best categorize your users and then play ads to them, in a sense, just as an example. And there it could just be that these demographics you have here might just, it's more complex, right? Because not every female that's 33 years old behaves the same, but then taking additional user behavior can help you to cluster and find those people. So uncovering hidden structure is the core essence of unsupervised learning. So coming back to our dog example, in unsupervised learning, we have no labels. So clustering, as I already said, is one of the key tasks. So if I throw this to the machine, it might give us this output. And we might look at this and say, oh yeah, great. That's like it found an input class, an indoor class, and an outdoor class. So a dog that's indoor, a dog that's outdoor. But it could as easily be, this is a lying dog, this is a sitting dog, or that's Elvis, that's Dexter, two different dogs. So it's what I want to teach, like give away with this is it's hard for us to really understand what the machine has been doing. It's just been optimizing for a certain metric that you give it, that find closeness in those images. And closeness in an image, like from a numerical perspective, doesn't necessarily have to translate to concepts that we as humans would associate to those images. That's, in a sense, unsupervised learning, finding hidden structures. Self-supervised learning is, in a sense, some consider it very close to unsupervised learning because we don't have like explicit labels as in supervised learning, but we're kind of bootstrapping those labels from its own data. What do I mean with that? So let's take our language as an example. So we have these powerful systems like OpenAI, where how we've been training language models in the past is that we were looking at a sentence like this, and we were saying, oh, that's a verb, that's a noun, classifying all these kind of words, and then helping the model predict what these actual concepts of a language are to better understand how humans structure language and how they talk. That doesn't scale that well. And we have seen that today's language models, you've probably heard, they have sometimes like billions of parameters and have somehow learned a way to do this more effectively by kind of self-discovering language. And how are they doing this? Because we assume that our language is not randomly arranged, we can just take a sentence and hide some words from the model. We're just hiding the concept of session and hiding the concept of intelligence from the sentence. And we are masking the sentence, and I'm telling the model, hey, if I just give you in today's, we talk about as an input, and you have to predict what is the missing word, what would the model do? And then it would probably say, hey, there's a 56% chance of session, 30% chance of seminar. Same on the other, we could talk about artificial intelligence, but we could also talk about artificial joints, right? We just don't know from that concept yet. But the beauty now is we know the ground truth, right? Because we've purposely hidden it from the model. So the model can play the guessing game, and then we give it the true answer, and we can evaluate how good the model has been doing. So if you think back to your preschool years, that's in a sense this kind of filling the gaps kind of task that you had in school, how you were also becoming closer to language and its subtleties. And that's how these language models have been trained, by self-supervision, so supervising on its own data. And the last bucket we have is reinforcement learning. That's now a very different kind of family, because how reinforcement learning works is that it doesn't work really from like data that you've collected in the past, but it learns from interacting with an environment. That's probably from us as from a motoric perspective, how we navigate the world, what feels most like natural to us. So an environment and an agent, that's the two concepts you have to use reinforcement learning. You can think about like an agent as being like a baby that learns how to crawl in an environment like your living room. So what the baby does is it does an action, right? It moves its arms like this. And the environment, so its surroundings, gives it like feedback. Yeah? That feedback comes in a new state. That means in that case, the baby has moved from A to B. Yeah? And a reward. That means it gets some signals if that action it just did was valuable or not valuable. And that could, for example, be the parents that are cheering the baby that it did something right. So with that trial and error behavior, the agent in that case does a lot more actions and tries to understand which actions, given a certain state, give it a certain reward. And it's basically greedily trying to maximize this reward. So if the baby keeps crawling, hits its head on the wall, it gets a negative reward from its own sensors, right? Because it's in pain. And it realizes, okay, just doing the same crawling movement all over again without looking at someone, not just looking at mom, but looking at the surroundings is probably also beneficial. Here you have an example of the same concept, right? We have an environment, which is a game. That's the game here of Breakout. And you have a score, the score on top, that's the reward. And that's basically how an algorithm by DeepMind, it's already like 5 years ago, learned how to play the game of Breakout. And here you see that the machine just realized, hey, I can move from left to right. These are the actions I'm doing. And I'm trying to maximize those points. And at some point it realized, wow, I can do a way better job if I'm digging a tunnel on the left and just let it do the job for me. And then once it has discovered this shortcut, it is of course like very well incentivized to do that again. Here's like another simulation of from OpenAI, how like a humanoid robot tries to learn how to walk. right? And here the incentive is stand up as long as you can, try to make as much distance as you can. And this looks super funny to us, right? Because we have a clear expectation how like a humanoid form has to walk. And it definitely doesn't look like this. But that's remember, for reinforcement learning, we have this human input. That's the reward. We have to tell it what good behavior looks like. And if we don't tell this humanoid thing that walking gently, elegantly is beneficial, it won't do it, right? It will just greedily optimize for what brings it mileage in this sense, or how it can stand up the most. And there's other funny videos where one humanoid form always does a raving movement to keep its balance. And that's something it had discovered that's beneficial for it. No one has taught it ever and told it to not do it. So it continues to do it. So that completes our dive into this machine learning universe. So input-output connection, supervised, uncovering hidden structure. Then we have this learning from internal targets as self-supervision, and reinforcement learning is really learning from the interaction with an environment. So yeah, and just another matrix that I can maybe give you as an extra example with you. So I sometimes classify this as I say, okay, one thing you can think of is the objective. So the thing you want to solve, is that explicitly or implicitly given? So are you explicitly as a human defining the concept of good or bad, or is it implicitly given by the data itself? And on the other axis you have, does ground truth, so the true result, exist or not? And then you can think of for supervised learning, we humans, we can label an image whatever we want, woof or hui, and the ground truth exists, we labeled it, and the machine can learn how to do it. For reinforcement learning, we give an explicit advice what we consider good or bad, but the ground truth doesn't exist. The perfect strategy is something that the machine tries to kind of on the go try to build out. And then supervised learning, the objective is implicitly given, language is language, but the ground truth also exists, right? Because we know we are pointing towards a specific target. And for unsupervised learning, the ground truth doesn't exist. We don't know what the perfect cluster is given the data, and it's also implicit. This is another pointer to give away. Okay, these were the three major distinctions I wanted you to have from today's session. So on the left, super intelligence, general narrow intelligence, then the circle diagram classifying the different forms of AI, and the different learning styles of how machine learning systems can really get to a point. So I'm actually gonna, for the sake of time, I think I'm gonna jump over the additional concepts. I'm happy to share some of the notes afterwards and directly go to the recent advances. So close your eyes. I'm going to talk a little bit more about transfer learning and some of the different examples here, how you classify different topics. But let's come to the fun part, right? Recent advances in AI, and then we have also more time for Q&A. So four areas I picked out where I think AI has moved a lot in the last year is one, generally the concept of reinforcement learning, where I'm going to give you a few examples. Biology is something where I think there was interesting news to share. And then we have natural language processing and computer vision. And as you can see, they're mostly drawing from reinforcement, supervised learning, but also a lot from self-supervision. So reinforcement learning here, I just have the video, which unfortunately you can't hear, but that's fine. So you just see this was like an announcement where OpenAI said, hey, we're going to play now. Our AI system is going to play Dota, which is a computer game, multiplayer computer game, against these 5 humans. So 5 humans against 5 basically bots by OpenAI. And you saw this was a huge show match. People were watching this live, super excited about it. And this was normally something where people say, there's no chance that AI can already solve such complex problems, right? If you look at how these environments look like, this is something with a lot of inputs, very unstructured environments. But I mean, you see the results on the right side. the bots have been winning almost every single game. So this is already something where even the world champions can cope with machines anymore. Another thing is here, if you like really moving objects in the physical world, which is also done here by this humanoid hand by exploring. And what I always like to joke about is what you see is apparently our evolution isn't perfect yet, because if you replay this, you see that it's somehow has found no use for the middle finger. The middle finger is just not used because it has, by trial and error, kind of realized that the other fingers are good enough to do the trick. So again, we didn't tell it use all the fingers, but just move the physical objects most effectively. Okay, another very practical example. So MuZero is an algorithm, a very general reinforcement learning algorithm that was like popularized by DeepMind, that is able to solve Atari games like we have just seen, but also solve board games like Go, like chess, where before the systems were reinforcement learning systems, but like tailored to that specific game. And they have, with this algorithm, realized the possibility to generalize to different games and strategies. They've like now really put it into the real world. They're now on YouTube. Some of the image compression is now done in a sense by a reinforcement learning algorithm that kind of tries to, with in a sense, a trial and error fashion to optimize the compression. So there's no brute force compression anymore, but it's like a learned system that then processes these images, which I think is like a very cool example of how this game playing algorithm was moved into the real world. So that was reinforcement learning. Let's dive into biology as a second topic. So again, we are talking about DeepMind here. So this is big news that broke, I think, half a year ago, that DeepMind reported that they have solved with AlphaFold a 50-year-old grand challenge in biology, which is called protein folding. So, I mean, I'm also not a medical expert, but why is protein folding interesting, right? Because generally, like proteins are a long chain of amino acids, and you can specify them by the chain, but to really understand their biological traits and how they interact, you only understand once you know how they really fold, and then they look like an object like this or something you have here. There's also a video. You see this like huge chain of amino acids here, and that chain is fine, but knowing how it then really forms a 3D geometry and how it folds is essential for you to know what the functions it will have and have in store. So I don't know why it's not folding. Now it's folding. And normally you can do that with like a microscope, and like with an electron microscope, really understand the exact geometry, and that people are doing that, but it's very expensive, right? So if you have a new chain that you want to understand how it folds, you have to orchestrate it in an experiment, measure it. But that doesn't really work with rapid experimentation. And now you have a system that can very accurately predict how these things are folding. You can use this as a prior to understand the biological traits of a lot of different protein sequences, and thereby advance drug research by like 100x. And I think that's like very exciting times also for the biotech sphere that we're looking into. And yeah, here you see the just looking at this. So this was these challenges of predicting maybe classical algorithms, how good you can predict these overlaps of how you predict that the thing is going to fold and how it's actually folding. They were always like stagnating on these challenges. And then this is when DeepMind stepped into the game with the first iteration, reached this level 60%, and now they're at around 90%, which is, they consider the problem solved, because 90% overlap on a 3D shape is pretty accurate. Let's talk about natural language processing. That's an image that's already been dated, but that's like when OpenAI released GPT-3, that was like one of the graphs that was like trending, where you just have seen that over the years, building natural language processing models that really understand text, scaling them up has been a trend that has also given us a lot positive results, right? With more, here's parameters in size of millions. So like here there would be 175 billion parameter model, has shown if we can effectively scale this with our compute infrastructure, it gives us great results. And then the data this was trained on is just basically the web, right? Common crawl is like a huge data set from the whole web that was crawled. And they also added some more high quality data to the mix, like Wikipedia and books and web text. But just like training it with this self-supervised fashion we talked about at large scale has helped us to achieve some very awesome results, right? And so that's just normally in pre-GPT-3 in a sense, for something like translation, you would have like DeepL, you would have a lot of supervised models that have been trained on, here's a bunch of German text, here's a bunch of English text. This is like the input, that's the output. And that is how you've been training like language translation models. What we see here now is that GPT-3 can be prompted to be a translation model. And that has been like this idea of prompting a language model to do a specific task has been like the game changer that these big models have brought into the mix. You see here, you can teach the model translate English to German. That's the task description. And then you say cheese and like you add an arrow, and then you expect it to say that it's fromage. And the models are in a sense flexible that you can give them a task and also prompt them with examples. And that's like if you heard these concepts like zero-shot learning or one-shot learning or few-shot learning, it basically says how many explicit examples on a new task do you have to give a model to perform it. And that's what you see here on the left side, that GPT-3 has been the first one to really master this trait. But it was a new edition of GPT-3, which is even cooler, that you can prompt a model and give it an input. That's just something from their release that I think was 2 weeks ago, where they can work with a prompt and an input, and they really can do tasks that maybe even not human non-experts on a specific craft could do. Here, for example, it's giving that's code for Fibonacci numbers, improve the runtime and complexity of this function. You give this as input, and it changes the function. And if you're an expert now, you understand that there's a recursion that's broken with up with a memory. You know that this is more effective, and that the machine can do this task that normally requires a programmer by prompting it. It's just a completely new way of interacting with a computer. But there's been even cooler news last week that Google has released a even bigger model. It's called TUM, and that has really taken NLP to an even bigger level. And this graph that they've shown here is that they say, hey, what we've discovered is scaling the model does not just make it better on something like question answering, which a model is already good, or language understanding. But by scaling the model, we are unlocking completely new capabilities. And that has been super exciting. And I think one of the most exciting ones is reasoning. So that has been something that GPT-3 couldn't do before. If you have something like, hey, Roger has 5 tennis balls, he buys 2 more cans of tennis balls, he can have, each can has 50 tennis balls, how many tennis balls does it have? 11 as an answer. And then you give it a prompt, and the model can't cope with this answer. But now, if you give the problem a chain of thought, that you give it one example where you help it understand reasoning, say, hey, look, this is how you approach such a problem. Roger has 5 balls, 2 cans, 3 balls have 6 balls, 5 plus 6 is 11. Out of a sudden, the model can apply this to a new task. And that is just where you feel, okay, that's really reasoning, just teaching it a problem understanding capability once and then applying it to something new. And I mean, that's where we think of what consciousness actually is, right? If you can really apply reasoning to your problems, I think that's, we're definitely getting somewhere. Last but not least, computer vision. There's also been some cool stuff happening. Maybe you've heard of the concept of generative adversarial networks. Maybe I'm also just giving this away. That's just a way of helping a computer generate similar looking data from data it has already seen before. So think about, you have a data set of a lot of Makeathon participants with a lot of different faces, and I now want to create more faces, but new faces from that data set. That's like a family of algorithm that has been used. And you can see just here examples how these models are really from data points generating new images. And on the right side, you see the quality that they have now achieved, right? You see that also the beard textures before were looking like very weird. And this is something that the models have now completely understood. And you know that how you can see that these images are just generated is if you play around in the input space a little bit. And this is like the input space of animals. And you can see that one animal can just morph into another animal. And this is like the new version of it, where you see there's no this alias free one. There's none of these weird sprinkles. It's like photorealistic every single instance. And yeah, I think that's something where in former days you would have used some Photoshop experts for days to generate these kind of morphs. And it also goes as far as landscapes, right? So you can morph photorealistic landscapes into each other because here the model has understood how beach scenes look like, and it has now the opportunity to generate new beach scenes. Yeah, I think that's also very cool. Another example is for autonomous driving. That's from Waymo. So they have now, think about Google Street View images, but a bit from a bit more of those. They have now, from single images they have acquired in their test rides, have been able to render a completely new scene. Like this is looks like a video game, but it's not built by 1,000 Blizzard engineers, but that's built from data, from a few images. It's generating a 3D environment of San Francisco. And you can also see how this is then. I think now light is gone. It's back. And okay, perfect. Right on time, switching the earpods around. But how you can see that this is generated is if you really look into it, that they can change like day scenes to night scenes. So that's just something that also wasn't there before. And of course, helps us to simulate environments better and then really learn how to interact into the real world. And the last thing I want to give away is also from OpenAI, the new DALL-E 2 model that they have just released, which is helping you create images from text. Yeah? And this is basically here an image that you see that you probably know has not existed before, from an astronaut riding a horse in space. And these are kind of prompts that you can give to these kind of images. And I've prepared here this like little video where I can just narrate over it. But that's right, really just like showing how these models create from raw pixels are able to generate something like a piano playing caller dunking a basketball, and that is then generated into a photorealistic image where you know something like this probably hasn't really existed before. And the interesting probability here is, again, we have this concept of editing, that you can cut out parts of an image and prompt it with like a new text sentence, what they call inpainting, which is like something that hasn't existed for this first DALL-E model, which was released over a year ago, where they could build something like an avocado armchair, which is already crazy. But now with this new model, they can inpaint now a dog into this. So they have these the photorealistic capabilities have just increased. They can also diversify now to different models. And how it does this is by understanding images and their captions, right? This is an image of a koala bear. This is a motorcycle, or an image of a motorcycle. And by internalizing these concepts, but also being able to associate it to them, that like a koala bear would sit on a motorcycle, helps it then to create these kind of images, right? Where you really know that a koala bear riding a motorcycle hasn't existed before. And if you can just think about the possibilities of creators that is possible, these kind of models, it's just, I think, very exciting times that we had. And here it gives you like that of course, these things are not perfect, right? That if there's uncertainty in the images it was trained on, then it can only do as good as the images it's trained on. And yeah, I think that's something there's a beta you can apply for. It's all pretty exciting, and cool videos you can look up in the web. Last statement before we go to the Q&A is this is Jan LeCun, one of the 3 godfathers of deep learning, like over a year ago already published this research blog post that said self-supervised learning might be the dark matter of intelligence. And there's, I think, currently these 2 two folks or groups. One believes that kind of reinforcement learning, this exploring the environment, is our goal to general intelligence. And there's, I think, this other camp, which is the self-supervised learning camp, which says, hey, building these even larger language models, where we have just seen that we've already started to fuse the image and the text domain, already multimodal, that this is our best way forward to general intelligence. Probably it's going to be both together, but I think it's just generally exciting times that we're currently ahead. And yeah, that was the part of the speech I want to bring across. The slides will also be, I think, sent around. There's lots of cool other documents you can look at to get more involved into machine learning or programming. Great courses you can do. There's always more to learn. I hope this was a good inspiration for you to be even more excited for the hackathon. And yeah, ask me anything.
Thanks very much, Sebastian. Even for me as a non-beginner, I feel like I still learned a lot from the talk. And it also made it easier for myself to also explain principles in AI, machine learning, topics like this to other people that might be hard sometimes to get it out in 1-2 words so that it's easy to understand. The first question we would have is on the topic of the Google Palm model you showed, and they're asking them, with the models getting bigger and bigger, do you think that only the big companies like Google, OpenAI will be able to do AI research and create new models, and the startups and smaller companies are there just fine-tuning existing models that are shared by those bigger players?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the direction that we've been going. I think already in like 2016, there was like Kai-Fu Lee, well-known also researcher and figure, that said, we are currently in an age of AI implementation, where the edge for you as a small company doing fancy AI research and this being your main differentiator is often not the way to go anymore. But I think the best strategy for people using AI for real world businesses is to just take the best of breed that's currently available via open source. That was the trend, I would say, until like last year. And now we are seeing that, yeah, because the models are getting so large and the compute to create such a model, it costs you like $1 million just to run one end-to-end training for one of these models, is just not feasible anymore. So it actually does make sense for companies like OpenAI to commercialize this via an API. But of course, then again, there's also this notion that people say they're becoming more of a closed AI than open AI because since they're bought by Microsoft, they have to commercialize. But I think, yeah, definitely my belief is that being on top of what's possible with prompting, fine-tuning, using existing models, or maybe even smaller, like open source available replicas, is definitely the way to go. I always recommend for companies to hire AI engineers, meaning people who really understand what AI really means, but that can write clean code. I think only a few organizations can really afford to pay top-notch PhDs researchers that are really working on new model design. And I think as a standard company, you're way better off with working with open source or commercially available APIs.
To continue on this topic, one question is asking you, as you have worked with SMEs, what would you say is the biggest hurdle to adoption of AI for them? Because for me as a beginner, it seems like with all the off-the-shelf models and API solutions available, it should be not that hard to implement it. So maybe it's on the topic of data engineering. Yeah. They feel the solutions.
No, 100%. But I think there's of course these different abstraction layers, right? I think one, we have you using open source available code, but then just really working with the plain vanilla code and operationalizing it. There's also a great tool for you to run, like ML ops has been like, of course, also an increasing topic for really bridging this gap from research to production. But I think often you don't even have to go that far, right? But because there is like low code or no code versions that you can work with. Low code being really there's like a higher abstraction layer, APIs you can use. Still an API, you still have to program against it, but the whole AI knowledge is abstracted away from you. Or even no code interfaces, right? There's also like startups like from like Levity, for example, from WHU, that is like helping you as like for SMEs to automate some of these like image or text tasks by having like a no code interface where you can just plug and play, feed some data in, train a custom model, and then just use it as an API. So I think that's more and more the direction where people are going to. And I would always first try with either an off-the-shelf API that exists or a model that exists that you can easily integrate, or like some of these low-code interfaces. If you don't feel that you're getting a huge edge by building this out by yourselves. And for some cases, it makes sense to build this out. Right? We have a few like AI models that are in production with our software where we feel, okay, this is like so complex and so unique to our offering that we have to build it ourselves. But something like a language understanding for a chatbot, I would never build myself, right?
Okay, so you need to have the understanding what might be hard to build, what already exists, where should I spend my resources. And one question on the topic of SMEs was, if I would start building AI solutions for a sector, maybe electronics, should I more target the small companies, or should I try and get a big enterprise as my first customer?
So basically for you as a startup, you mean? I think the answer I would like to give is the journey we also went through, and I think that there are very few AI first business models that really can build a big company. I think in most cases, you are generally better off, depending on the problem you're solving, but to first build like a software that digitizes a certain process, that gets you access to the stakeholders, that maybe doesn't use any machine learning behind the scenes at all, but already solves a business problem. I always say if you can only sell your company because it has use the word AI on your website a lot, then you're probably not solving a real problem. And often it's really, you have to have the also practical business acumen to say, hey, we're not just going to do it because it's cool, but we're going to use it because it really moves the needle. And for some cases, it does move the needle, but for some cases, you realize, hey, I can just program this in 3 rules. I mean, there's always sometimes these LinkedIn posts where people have trained ridiculous models for data cleaning. And there was one engineer that just took a regex to the max and then solved it perfectly, right? So I think you always have to ask yourself, is this something that I should do myself? So I think that my question is, ideally, you're not looking with the hammer for the nail, but you're like solving a real problem, and then you're thinking, ideally from day one, data first. Which data should I collect? How should I collect it? What are the different processes? What would be the metrics, how I would measure success? And then iteratively work towards that. But the first baseline should ideally always just be like a hard-crafted rule. So you at least have a baseline and you know what actually good performance means.
And then we have another question. I think you already answered it before with the no-code tools. It was, can I integrate AI into my startup without knowing how to code? Yeah,
so I think that would be, I think they're different, like for different domains, you have different like no-code tools. And they, for example, some of them work with, you have like a Slack integration where you interact with when new data comes in and the model is unsure and you want to QA the data, it comes into Slack, or you just upload it via a drag and drop in like a user interface for like a admin dashboard. So yeah, so I think there's definitely lots of possibilities. Think, like Integromat, Zapier have like allowed you to kind of connect 2 tools together without being like an API engineer. Same goes here with these no-code tools. I think that would be always where I would start.
On the point of starting, as someone asked, what I saw from your website is you first started as an AI consultancy, and only later started to build your own solution and trying to scale it. Would you recommend this path for someone else, or should you start with a product first and trying to scale?
So I think, why did we end up doing this was very much given the timing and our skill set at the time. So I think this little mini backstory is that, so Timon and I, my co-founder, we met during a time at Stanford. We were fortunate enough to be there starting 2015, 16, when the AI hype in the Valley really took off. And we felt that we had this 1.5 year advantage towards like the European ecosystem. And by coming back to Germany and basically really helping like Germany or like German companies to understand AI and really start integrating first sensible use cases, not hype use cases, into their business model, was where we felt that we can really add the value from day one, even though we don't have a crazy startup idea, and we can become an entrepreneur, get our hands dirty. So I think for us at the time, that was the right choice. But it was always clear that we're not going to build the Accenture for deep learning or try to build that. But at some point, we want to move away for this into a product. And I think what we realized over the time is, of course, that there's just things I just said, right? There are little AI first business models. First, you often have to, it helps if you have a data-driven acumen, but you have to realize, hey, I might need to program 90% of my software will be plain vanilla software engineering. And then there will be these 10%, maybe 20% later that can move the needle for my customers. So to answer this question, I think today, this path would probably not be possible like this anymore. I think by now you could do the same thing being a Web3 consultant. I think you have to be very early in the hype and have some proof that you're in a position to teach someone. So that's why I think that doesn't make sense. I think in general, being like running a consultant model for some time can definitely make sense, especially if you know already the kind of problem or domain you're trying to work in, right? If you know you're going to be in construction tech and you have like a way of building software for construction people, then you're getting paid for discovering real problems. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So either you're early with technology and you want to learn about more use cases, but there I also have to tell you that you're doing a project and then you're stuck with that project for some time. So there's no new learning during the time. So either you're just doing consulting, then you see a lot of different just use case workshops if you want to really see a lot of cases. But if you do engineering, then this idea of finding the perfect case within your project will probably not work out that well if you're not really watching out. Or you pick one domain, you consult there and then build out software, but then it doesn't probably, I'm not sure if this then has to be with the AI angle, or if you can just generally be like the digital natives in industry XYZ that will help you discover even more valuable business cases.
Sounds great. And on a matter of timing, because you had said, okay, now Web3 is in a hype cycle. With timing, you are active in the electronics area, and there were a lot of like shortages in the supply chain. Did this help you in getting more SMEs to adopt your solution, or did you not feel any effects there?
No, 100%. So I think we were from the timing, I think, just in a sense, just right. We could have, of course, been a little bit earlier. But I think, yeah, with COVID hitting, with the supply chain disruption happening, this kind of uncovered the underlying problem of the industry and the supply chain that has always existed. But now people finally, and that's what you always, when you work with old industry, people are very change averse and they often need a macro shock to really start acting. I think that was for us timing wise, of course, ideal because people realize they can't work with their old systems anymore. If they work with Excel, they're losing deals. This is not real time and prices and stuff is changing within seconds. So that was for us definitely the needed disruptor in the mindset of the people in the industry. And it's of course a massive tailwind for us now, being in that industry now for already some time. And it's not an easy industry to break into, one from the people part, but also from the domain, right? And I think that's like the unique skill set that we have tried to marry, this electrical engineering domain knowledge on the one hand, but having the acumen for data-driven, digital, user-friendly software, which has been our success, I think, criteria for this industry.
Great. So you would really say the problems already existed there, but this pandemic helped highlight, okay, what a big influence can such problems have. And now a question related to the very start of your presentation. You mentioned that for a robot, for a machine to hear, it first translates the sound into text, and then on this text it performs sentiment analysis. And this participant is asking themselves if it's not unnecessary to divide it into two steps, but it would be smarter maybe to go from sound directly to text, including the sentiment.
Yeah, so that's very good. So there are currently models that are directly performing tasks on speech, basically, and I even have like systems that are doing speech to speech kind of translations as an example. But what you of course have to understand that so far we haven't, like the self-supervised paradigm that I just talked about that made us scale to this massive language understanding. There's no similar motion as of now really for speech. They're trying stuff like that, but we don't have like a GPT-3 for sound just yet. So that means if you want to leverage that whole natural understanding capability that we have in text form, this is just for you the best way to do it, to first translate it into text and then operate on the text input. I'm definitely sure this has been a trend in deep learning specifically. In the end-to-end often wins, right? That the less human assumptions you have in the middle, the better the result will be. But it often takes more compute, smarter approaches, new models, and at the time, I would say hands down, the most industry-ready approach is always try to use the best speech-to-text algorithm you have, do NLP, and then use some of the text-to-speech. Like Alexa works exactly the same way, right? It's translating the text, working on the text, send this to the cloud. There's like an NLP version happening, brings it back to Alexa, and then it speaks text back to you. Yeah.
Thanks. And then we're coming to another question about models. And they say, when looking for what models to use, I found different solutions promoting themselves as auto machine learning. Would it be smart for me as a beginner to use such a solution, or where would you recommend to use something like this?
Yeah, so I think it definitely makes sense. So what AutoML, there's different nuances to AutoML, but in a sense, if you think about what a no-code solution for you does, so either you're using a pre-trained model, so it already exists, there's no more learning, just using the model, or you feed it new data and it's training. And what happens behind the scenes is AutoML. So basically all the nuances of picking a model, picking how you actually train it, what the perfect mathematical optimization is for this model is abstracted away from you. So the answer is yes, I would definitely always try to first work with the higher abstraction layers, and only if you feel that it's not satisfying your needs, then you go deeper.
Great. And now we're coming to the last three questions. You talked about the topic of clustering, and they're asking, when you have no labels in clustering, how can you find out how good the results are? So how do you know that they capture the concepts you were looking for?
You often don't, only by like picking examples and trying to evaluate them, really evaluate them. So that's one of the shortcomings in a sense. What you always get is like a distance metric between different, like you get a purity metric of your cluster, but you don't know if that purity metric was actually optimizing for the right thing. So I think you often just don't, only if sometimes you're using this clustering approach as well, to where you have a few examples where you know the answer, and you're just trying to also kind of implicitly label all the ones around them as the same thing, then you could, of course, then really look up different things. Where does this normally make sense? If you feel that acquiring other labels is expensive, right? If I know I could, in theory, flip all those cards, but I have to pay a price for all of them. So that means like I flip a few cards, I cluster all the others around them and just assume, okay, that's good. And then for some test cases, I could, of course, flip all the cards and then analyze it a little bit. So that would be one way. But only if you have a ground truth. If there's no ground truth, then you just don't.
Okay. You showed DALL-E at the end and how we can create images of our imagination very easily. And how can we make sure that this is not used for bad purposes, like creating fake news?
Yeah, you also can't. So that's one of the issues. I think, of course, if it's just used via an API, right, then you could have some filters on which prompts are allowed, right? And there could be some reglementation be done by OpenAI. That's like for the creation part, but that's not in their hands in a sense. And the other part is the detection part. And there's also a great research from TUM actually, from Matthias Niesner from Garching, that are trying to, this concept of deep fakes is in a sense a little bit related, like fake images and thinking, are they real or are they fake? And of course, there's like forensic algorithms that you can use that are trying to find traces of this being an artificial image. And that's, of course, something where you could detect that this is an artificial image. I think that's something that definitely has to come, right? That you see an image on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, and it has a label, either filtered, or artificially created, so you can easily detect fake news or something. So I think that's definitely a kind of reglementation that you have to do and has to come.
Okay, and now for the last question. Could you recommend any good resources to stay up to date with the developments in AI that are also beginner friendly?
Yeah, so I think in general, there's blogs. You can blogs I follow is one is called Deep Learning Weekly and one is called Import AI. This is things I think you can read through, and they always have like a more detailed description, and then also something why this matters. So I think it also is a good way for you to test the waters and how deep you want to go. I think that's the two newsletters I most of the time look at.
Thanks for the recommendations. And now we're at the end of our workshop. So Sebastian, if you would like to say some closing words, now is your chance, and afterwards I will be telling our participants what will happen afterwards.
Yeah, no, 100%, super great. Really enjoyed also the thoughtful questions you guys had, even though I didn't see the participants, but it felt vivid. And of course, we at Luminovo you've already been asking questions, what we're doing, and yeah, we're trying to, in my view, change one of the most important industries of our day and age, right? Impacting all of our physical lives. And yeah, we're of course hiring, we're growing. Some pictures and impressions of like our team retreats and yeah, also factory visits of our clients. So if you're interested, you can scan the QR code or just go to our website with a lot of different positions. Also for like students, I would say like talent wanted positions where you can just apply with like an idea about what you want to do, and then we see if we can find something for you. So we'll definitely be excited if some of you apply. And yeah, I wish you a great rest of the workshop and the Makeathon, and happy Easter.
Thanks very much, and also happy Easter. Quick question: can anybody apply, or is it just Munich based?
No, yeah, good question. So we're hiring remotely, and everything plus minus 2 hours is fine. So we have currently people from Helsinki to Africa, to Nairobi or Lagos. So that all works. We have an office in Munich. We also have a small office close to Wiesbaden, but the rest is also with people working remotely from all over Europe and Africa. So that all works. So we're remote first.
Great. So everybody can apply. Make sure to use this chance. And now, thanks again, Sebastian, for the workshop, and for everybody watching. Today, there will be no formal team finding event afterwards, but you can still jump into the same GatherTown link that we provided the 2 days before and talk with each other, interact, find a team, and choose your favorite tracks. In the general chat on Slack, you can find the links to the team formation. Please keep in mind the deadline is on Friday at midnight. Until then, you have to submit your teams. It's for a minimum of 2 people and a maximum of 5, and you can only participate in a Makeathon weekend if you're part of a team. And yeah, next week, make sure not to miss the experts talk starting on Tuesday. And then on Thursday, we have the partners launch where you will be able to directly interact with all of the companies and ask your questions in person. So thanks for tuning in and see you next week.